Despite some of the anger and angst that was generated because of some stuff that was said by the creators of this movie, the emasculation of men that happens in here, it's not what you think. Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves. I had the opportunity to attend an early access, advanced screener type thing that Amazon Prime was offering to its customers. I was able to go to my local cinema, my favorite one, the one I go to all the time, and see this today, Sunday. That's how I spent my afternoon. I went into this movie knowing about the recent sort of stir up that happened based on some things the directors or creators of the film said. And so I was very much aware and looking for these particular things and expecting that it might be something that would really get under my skin. And I have to say, you guys, it didn't. It was not done in the way that you might think it was when you think of things like emasculation of men in movies and how men are often the butt of jokes and they're incompetent and women are superior and all that sort of stuff. It just doesn't play out exactly that way. I became more and more interested in watching this movie as time went on. I wasn't super excited about it until it got closer to the time and I was hearing that there were good things that had been coming out of, I guess, even earlier audiences than mine. And so I was like, you know what? It might not be too bad. Then the whole thing about emasculation of men happened and I was like, oh gosh, don't tell me. And the people in the article or the creators, they were directly quoted and they were saying, but it's not for woke purposes. It's not like that. And I'm like, yeah, okay, sure. We'll see. So I go into it and it's not really, it really isn't. And I'm pretty sensitive to these sorts of things, sensitive in the fact that I can sniff it out pretty easily. And if it's not something that I'm really being hit over the head with, then I personally don't have a problem with it because I don't see wokeness around every corner and I don't see male bashing around every corner. Yes, it exists. It's a thing. I can't stand it. But I really did not get the sense that that was the case with this movie. This is primarily, to me, a comedy. And a lot of times in comedy, there are these situations where certain characters kind of, are made fun of, or they're the butt of jokes and stuff like that. And that was sort of the case here, but they weren't, the characters in here, the men specifically, they were not incompetent. They were not stupid. One of them, the sorcerer guy, he had some self-esteem issues. So he was viewed as kind of like weak by, like there's this girl that he's interested in and he didn't have the self-esteem to impress her, I guess. Well, I noticed that and it kind of annoyed me about the girl because I will say this about the girls. I like the girls fine. The two main girls, Michelle Rodriguez and, oh gosh, the girl who plays her, Sophia Lillis. Thank you. Perfect timing. I like their characters. But I did notice that their characters really didn't do much wrong. Like they were almost perfect in everything that they did. There was something I forgot to say. I didn't write this down in my notes, but I had it in the back of my mind while I was thinking over the movie after it was done, that like I was saying about the girls, that they were pretty much perfect and they didn't really do much wrong or mess up or whatever. That to me made them, while I like their characters just fine, that made them less interesting than the male characters in this movie. The male characters, whatever flaws they had or mistakes that they might have made along the way, even though they weren't portrayed as being totally incompetent or anything, the male characters to me, they came across as more interesting because of these different things about their characters or them as people and the struggles that they had to deal with. That made them more complex and interesting to me as a character. So yeah, that was what I meant to point out. Okay, back to the video. They weren't necessary. Like there was a time where Michelle Rodriguez's character, there was some stuff she was saying that was kind of like silly, and so she got poked fun at a little bit. The druid girl, I didn't really pick up on any of that. But surprisingly, it wasn't done in such a way that made me not like the girls. The girls were not assholes and they weren't full of themselves, and they didn't think that their male companions that they were, this group that they were part of, they didn't look down on them, they didn't berate them, and so it worked. Honestly, you guys, it worked. And it did not come across as woke to me, and I had a doggone fun time with this movie. There was actually even a quote that one of the characters said that I really appreciate. I appreciated it so much that I wrote it down, and I will mention it in a minute. So I'm going to kind of start going down through my notes. I've already talked about the emasculation of men, but I didn't get the sense that it was coming from a mean-spirited place. And a lot of times you can pick that up, or I can. And I did not pick that up here. I love Chris Pine's comedic timing. He's a really funny actor. He can play serious roles, but he's also very good at comedy. And I really loved the comedy that he had in the Wonder Woman movie. He struck a really good balance between comedy and seriousness. And I felt like he did that here as well. I really appreciate his performance in here. And I also was thinking of something that I was listening to, or video I was watching right before this, and oh gosh, what channel was it? Shoot, Mr. H Reviews, maybe? And he was looking at an article where they were talking about this issue that I was mentioning. And one of the creators said that this movie was a celebration of comedy and character. And that is what I took away with it. It was, the characters were interesting. They weren't like the deepest ever that you'll see in a film, but they weren't so superficial that you didn't care about them. And they weren't so superficial that they didn't make an impact on you. And I appreciated that about this. There was something that Hugh Grant said also that was mentioned in this article. He mentioned that, he enjoyed the script, and he hoped that it would be something, that this movie would be something that would be accessible to the non-D&D crowd. For me, it was. I am not into Dungeons and Dragons. I'm not into gaming. I like fantasy type, fantasy's not really on up there for me when it comes to movies. I will watch fantasy, but it's not something I'm immediately drawn to. And, that's probably one of the reasons why I wasn't immediately drawn to this film. I was going to see it, but it wasn't like, oh, I can't wait. But this does a really good job of blending that fantasy and the comedy, like the mixture of the two genres. Comedy's not my favorite thing, but I do like when it's mixed in with other stuff. And this film does a really decent job of balancing the comedy with the seriousness. It wasn't something that felt ridiculously goofy. There were some funny, goofy-ish moments that happen during scenes where there's action going on and lives at stake, but it wasn't something that felt slapsticky to the point that you just wanted to roll your eyes. I thought for the most part, the fight choreography was pretty decent. There was a moment or two at least where, the whole make sure you swing high so that I can duck and you won't hit me, that sort of, with the choreography. But the editing of those fight scenes was tight enough that you don't really notice that too much. And some of the events that happened during the choreography of the fighting or during the scenes of fighting was kind of funny how it played out. Funny as in, oh, that was actually really clever how they did that. That was cool. I like that. And the film, as far as the length, it's quite long, you guys. It's more than 2 hours long. There is a mid-credit scene, nothing at the end. I didn't stay to the end because I had read there was nothing at the end. There was just something in the middle. And I actually predicted what was going to be the mid-credit scene, and I was accurate. And when you get to a certain moment in the movie, I think you'll probably guess, oh, this is going to be the mid-credit scene. And you'll be right. It was kind of, it seemed a bit obvious that was going to be something that they were going to come back around to. There was some cool stuff, like cool magic-y stuff that they showed in here. Like there's a portal that one of the characters uses, and they did this really interesting scene where they were trying to put the portal somewhere. And the way they carried through with that, I thought that was shot really nice. It flowed. It kept my attention the whole time. And I that really stood out, that particular scene. And you may have seen portions of that during like the trailers or little clips or something. One thing that I do regret is that I watched some clips of this before I went to go see it. There are two particular scenes. There's a fight scene in here and also a scene that takes place in a graveyard. I saw those scenes before I went to see the movie. I can't even remember why did I watch them. Why they may have been playing inside, whatever. I saw them, so I knew what was going to happen. So the comedy, I mean, I already knew, haha, this is funny. I knew what the comedy was going to be. So I was like, oh, dang it. I really feel like I should just get more and more in the habit of not watching anything about any movie that I'm even remotely interested in. And I'm seriously thinking about just not paying attention too much to trailers. I know I do trailer reactions. I guess it will just depend. But anyway, I digress. There was some interesting stuff that I noticed in here that, you know, reminded me of some of the books that I've worked on. There's I don't know what they call it in Dungeons and Dragons, but there's a book series that we work on at Sound Booth Theater called Everybody Loves Large Chests. And it's about a mimic. It's like looks like a chest, and it's this creature. Well, one of those things shows up in here. I think they've shown it in the trailers or something. So when I saw that, I was like, I recognize that. I know what that is, but I don't know what they call it in Dungeons and Dragons, but I call it a mimic. And his name is Boxy in the series that we work on. Oh, it's a crazy series. Anyway, okay. The audience that I saw this with seemed to thoroughly enjoy this film. There was applause afterwards, and it was a full audience, but that was, I think, because of the excitement of the fact that it was such an advance, it was like a week and a half early or more, a little bit more, like a week and a half ahead of schedule. So that was exciting. So, the audience that was there was genuinely interested in this film. So I feel like everybody pretty much enjoyed this, just like I did. What was I getting ready to say? Oh, there is a Hulk and moment in this movie that tickled the entire audience. And yes, I laughed too. It was fun. And just thinking about it makes me laugh. I even thought about using that as my intro, but I decided not to. I went with the other one instead. Anyway, you'll know it when you see it. If you've seen the Avengers, you will know exactly what I'm talking about when this thing happens. It was pretty funny. So yeah, I think I've gone through everything. All the notes that I made as far as different things that I enjoyed. There was really only one con. It's just something that I noticed with the CGI. When they were showing the characters riding on horses from a great distance, it was very obvious that the horses were CGI. That stood out to me enough that I wrote it down. Not a huge con. Most of the CGI in here was pretty decent, so I don't think it's going to be anything that takes you out of a moment, seeing horses that look like this, but it's very obvious they're not horses anyway. That was minor. The quote that one of the characters said was, he said, you are at your, and this dealt with one of the characters and their issues of not feeling very confident in their abilities, and the character was telling this particular person that you are at your strongest when you think you're at your weakest. And I was like, I like that quote. I really enjoyed that quote. I'm going to write it down. This might be one of my top movie quotes. I appreciated it. I thought that was good. I like the messaging in here about that. Shoot, there was something else I was going to say. Oh, yes, something else I was going to mention with regard to the emasculation thing and the characters in here. So that kid's a sorcerer. He is a bard. Chris Pine is a bard. She is a barbarian. And the other girl, Sophia, the girl right there between Chris and this guy, she was a druid. So they had different abilities that, in some aspects, depending on the situation, elevates them above one of their comrades, right? So the barbarian, she's freakishly strong. She's very, very strong, which is why she's doing all the fighting. And Chris Pine's not a fighter. He was like he's a bard, but he had also been like a spy or something. So he's not a barbarian type. He's not a fighter. He's not very he doesn't get hugely into the fight physically. So the fact that their characters were these different things, like the druid, and she could change shape, and so she could do things that nobody else could do. The sorcerer had powers that nobody else did. Chris Pine's character, he was a good planner, so he had talent. So like they all seemed to complement each other, and they worked together pretty well to achieve these goals that they were trying to achieve. So it didn't bother me overly much that Michelle Rodriguez's character was the kick-ass person and Chris Pine wasn't, because their character paths are totally different things. So I just appreciated how everybody was, like, the character dynamics in here. It was pretty fun. Their dialogue was pretty fun. Their interactions were good. It felt natural. And I like the humor in here. I like the timing in here, the pacing. It didn't feel long to me. I never felt like, oh, geez, when is this going to be over? So that was a plus in my books. It wasn't draggy. I was invested in the characters, and I had a fun time with this. And I think that probably most audiences will enjoy it. I don't know, like diehard D&D fans, I don't know what they're going to think, because they might go into this with a certain expectation about the way it should be based on their knowledge of the game. But for people like me who really don't know much at all about it, I enjoyed it, and I can tell that this was a movie that was made to try to appeal to a lot of people across the board, even people that aren't necessarily interested in the subject matter of Dungeons and Dragons, D&D, whatever. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. I enjoyed it. Would not mind watching it again. Wouldn't mind adding it to my library. And hopefully this will be something that most people can appreciate. And whenever you guys get around to seeing it, let me know what you think. Let me know if you read different things into this than I did. Like I said, I'm pretty prickly about stuff when I can tell that there seems to be something agenda-driven that's happening in a story, and I really just did not pick up on that. So I do think that the creators of this were coming at this with an honest intention, that they weren't trying to be mean-spirited, they weren't trying to be woke or anything like that, and it worked. Yeah, for me, it worked. So hopefully you guys will enjoy it as well. Okay, that's enough for now. I'm going to wrap this up so that I can get this thing edited and maybe up in time for tomorrow or later tonight. I don't know. We'll see. All right, you guys. Adios.